Good morning, everyone, again. So this presentation, this may be broken up into part one and part two, just because I have to go to a funeral in a few minutes. So, but what we're going to talk about is medical cannabis, something that is going to be important for you to know about as PTs, because a lot of patients, more and more patients, are coming in and asking us about medical cannabis and our views on it, whether or not they should use it, and we also should know, why they're using it, how much they're using it, and um, and side effects of what might happen when someone uses medical cannabis. So, of course, can't talk about medical cannabis without there being a lot of jokes put in there. So, just some of you might know some of these references, but this is a show Weeds where they spend a lot of time smoking weed. This is 420, which is kind of a code for smoking marijuana or pot or cannabis. And there's a lot of theories about where 420 came from. One is that it was that 420 is Bob Marley's birthday, which may or may not be true. One is that 420, it was a time of day when people would like meet and up and smoke cannabis. And then the other nickname for marijuana is Mary Jane, and this is a picture of a Mary Jane shoe. Here's another little joke for you. So even older people might be using medical cannabis, and certainly medical cannabis, as we're going to talk about, has been around for a long time, longer than these people. And so although we often think that older adults will not be using drugs, believe me, any older adults who grew up in the 60s, so if they were 30 in the 60s, or well, they probably might not be around anymore, but those are some pretty older people. Someone who's around in their 20s or 30s in 1960, do that math, that's another 50 years. So they're going to be in their 80s or 90s, and they may well have used drugs and may still be using drugs or medical cannabis. So cannabis has been around a lot longer than the two young ladies in that previous picture. And it's been around as long ago as the earliest recording of it is 4000 BC. So it was a long time ago. It was originally developed as a crop. And in China, it was considered one of the 5 grains. And those 5 grains, you don't have to memorize this, but just for interest, were soybean, wheat, a kind of corn, kind of millet, broom corn, foxtail millet, and hemp. So hemp, which is one of the ways that you can get cannabis, is what is has been around for a very long time. And it was originally farmed as a food crop, and it also hemp can be made into a lot of different products, including textiles, rope, paper, and oil, as we'll talk about. And it's been recorded in the pharmacopoeia, or in pharmacologic use, since 2700 BC. So it's been around for a long time, and has been documented as being helpful for lots of different things. And there's varying amount of evidence for this, but people have been using it for many, many years for everything from rheumatoid arthritis or rheumatic pain is how it was first documented, gout, malaria, and since then it's been used for many, many other things, including cancer, pain, Parkinson's disease. So medical cannabis and hemp-based products have been around for a long time and have been used for a long time. And originally, when people discovered it had this psychoactive effect, so which really you need to heat the hemp or the cannabis in order for that to be released. But people found that this was from a very old document, and it says, taken in long term, it makes one communicate with the spirits and lightens one body. And I'm sure at least some of you have probably used cannabis, medical or not, and you can probably attest that may well be true. So the reason that we're talking about cannabis today and in its medical form is that it really does have a lot of compounds in it and not all of them have been studied. So there's only a few compounds that are in medical cannabis that have been studied. But those that have, many of them have been found to have helpful properties. So the two that we're going to focus on today are cannabinoids and terpenes. And cannabinoids are in the fatty part of a plant. So all plants, some plants have more fat in them than others. Like you can think of avocado has a high fat content, and different types of hemp or cannabis plants have different amounts of fat content. And we're going to talk about that. But it's that fatty component that makes the two main types of cannabinoids that we're going to talk about today, THC and cannabidiol. So, and THC, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're primarily going to talk about THC9, but we're also talk a little bit about THC8. And the other thing that we're going to talk about is that our own body has an endocannabinoid system. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, the other thing that you might hear patients talk about, or if you are looking at information regarding medical cannabis, people will often talk about terpenes. And terpenes are what give different plants their characteristic smell and taste. So different strains of cannabis and hemp have different types of terpenes, and they can be extracted as well. And so sometimes if you buy cannabis medically, or if you buy CBD as an oil, it'll have different types of terpenes in it. So terpenes are also found in other essential oils. Lavender has that distinctive smell. So lavender has the lavender terpene in it. Orange, black pepper, eucalyptus. So there's different terpenes that have different smells. And we'll go over a few of those in just a minute. So as I mentioned, we have an endocannabinoid system, and this was discovered a while ago. And we have receptors, cannabinoid receptors in our body. So they're kind of analogous to some of the opioid receptors that we have. And they're called endocannabinoid receptors. And we release endocannabinoids. So they are produced by our neurons and by some of the supporting cells that you have learned about this semester, microglia and astrocytes. So those are all in the central nervous system, and we have microglia in our peripheral nervous system as well. We have neurons in our peripheral nervous system. And it's believed that the endocannabinoid system is important for helping with the regulation of memory, pleasure, concentration, thinking, moving, coordination, your perception of time and other sensations, your appetite, and your perception of pain. And so your endocannabinoid system is going to work with other systems and kind of modulate all of these systems. So we know that whether you've used cannabis yourself or whether you've seen or heard of what happens when people use cannabis, we know that some of these things may be changed for the positive and some may be changed for the negative. So for instance, your coordination may be slightly impaired if you have a lot of THC in your system. So that is going to be possibly a negative side effect. Your concentration may be affected. However, in some derivatives, your concentration may be a little bit better. Your perception of pain may be decreased, which could be a real positive if you have chronic pain. Your appetite is likely going to be increased. And we all hear of people having the munchies, but that can actually be a real positive because people who have cancer or have some other ailment where they're having a hard time ingesting food, that can actually be really, really helpful. So I'm going to go into a little bit more about this on the next slide, and then we can talk a little bit more about this. So this is a slide I got from a cannabis dispensary a couple of years ago. It was the dispensary I got it from. Oops, sorry, I apologize. Okay. I didn't, I apologize. I didn't move this slide ahead. Okay, so I do want to just go through a little bit about about the difference between cannabis and endocannabinoids. So the major components of cannabis are cannabidiol, or CBD, which is non-psychoactive. It can have some of an anxiolytic, so it can reduce anxiety. It can help with psychosis, and it tends to have some antioxidant and neuroprotective effects. So I'm sure you've all seen CBD oil somewhere, seen an ad for it, or seen somebody who's used it. And so CBD can really has a lot of uses. And there's probably know almost less about it now and about its effectiveness, just because it's very unregulated right now. So if someone's using CBD, we may recommend that they, even though it's going to be more expensive, that they consider getting it from a dispensary rather than from the gas station, or from getting it from a pharmacy. Like Cook's Pharmacy, for instance, carries a pretty good CBD oil. But they're not all going to be the same. They're going to have different compounds in them. And we want to make sure it has a high concentration of cannabidiol if it's really going to be effective. So CBD does not make you high. If you were to take a drug test, you would not have THC in your system if you are strictly using CBD. So you don't have to worry about failing a drug test. Anybody can use CBD, and it will not impair your thinking. Although it says on here it can have kind of a hypnotic effect. It's a pretty minimal. And so CBD is considered a very safe compound. Now, THC, there's two types that we're going to talk a little bit about. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the one. So Delta-9 is the one that make you feel like high. And so it has that psychoactive property, and it can help relax people. So that's a real positive of THC, especially Delta-9. And then Delta-8 is a newer compound that's out there. And Delta-8 is can be produced by both cannabis and hemp, but there is a high concentration of it in hemp that can be extracted. So there is THC-8 in Delta-H THC in hemp. It's a higher concentration than the Delta-9 that is in hemp. And so because it can be extracted legally, as we'll talk about, it's become really prevalent on the market. Its psychoactive effects are much more mild than Delta-9, so you have to ingest more in order to have the same effect. And you may see that becomes more regulated over time. I think I have this on another slide, but just while I'm talking about it, I will mention that the reason that it's harder to get Delta-9 THC out of hemp rather than cannabis is that there's a very small concentration of it, and we're going to talk about that in another slide. But that makes it hard to extract. And it also makes it hard then to, same thing for Delta-8. And so you need a lot of hemp in order to be able to extract Delta-8. The downside of that is that it's possible that in order to get enough Delta-8 to make products, that people are using synthetic Delta-8. So you really need to be careful about where you're getting that from, because there are definitely risks associated with using synthetic cannabis. Okay, so why THC is why we care about it. And then I'll go back to the cannabinoid system, or actually I'm going to go back to the cannabinoid system now. So hold on, I'm going to stop here because I